The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 1021. In the private dining room, Lilian Yanis, Kiran York, and Jenny Leo sat quietly eating their meal. Despite the recent incident, their minds were still occupied with thoughts about Rex Kane, knowing the issue was far from resolved. Lilian was well aware that Rex Kane's sudden attack was a test. What surprised her was Jenny's newfound strength, which might shock others in Imperial Dragon. "Lilian, have they replied yet? When can we go to Imperial Dragon headquarters?" Kiran asked, looking at Lilian. "Not yet. Let's finish our meal and wait a bit longer," Lilian replied, her beautiful face showing a hint of worry. Sensing Lilian's unease, Kiran's mouth twisted into a cold smile. "It seems they deliberately sent Rex Kane to test us." Lilian's expression changed slightly, and she quickly glared at Kiran. "You're overthinking. That's not it at all." Lilian's denial only confirmed Kiran's suspicions. He bit into his bun forcefully. "If they don't realize the seriousness of my visit, I'll make sure they do." "What are you planning? Don't go too far," Lilian warned, her voice stern. "The York family was wiped out years ago. Doesn't Imperial Dragon owe me an explanation?" "If they refuse, I'll make sure those who deserve it meet their end," Kiran said coldly, his voice like icy water. Lilian felt the intense killing intent from Kiran and was visibly shaken. "You've already killed many from Wolfgate, Panthergate, and Liongate. What more do you want?" she asked, hoping to deter him. "Those clowns deserved it. They offended me, and they paid the price. Now it's time for those who orchestrated this conspiracy to face their reckoning," Kiran replied firmly. Kiran had initially been willing to wait, hoping for a peaceful resolution. But the attempt to test them with Rex Kane had angered him. He was now determined to bring a storm of blood and vengeance to Imperial Dragon to remind them of his unresolved family grudge. Lilian was worried. If Kiran went berserk, even the powerful Daniel Yarrow might not be enough to stop him. Imperial Dragon could suffer heavy losses, but they could also unite to kill Kiran. This double-edged sword put Lilian in a difficult position. Lilian glanced at Jenny, who was focused on eating, and said, "Jenny, do you have any suggestions? Shouldn't you try to persuade Kiran?" Jenny swallowed her food, wiped her lips, and smiled brightly. "Lilian, I think Kiran is right, and I'll help him if he decides to act." Jenny's recent display of strength had filled her with excitement and confidence. Her playful nature, combined with her newfound power, made her eager for action, much to Lilian's dismay. Lilian found the situation more complicated and reminded Kiran sternly, "Don't do anything rash until I've arranged something. Otherwise, we're done." Kiran was taken aback by Lilian's threat to break up. After finally confessing his feelings to her and getting her acceptance, this ultimatum came as a shock. Jenny giggled and teased Kiran, "You better behave, or Lilian will really dump you." Kiran took another fierce bite of his bun. "I'll wait until tomorrow. If they don't address this by then, I'll take action." Lilian didn't respond, but knew Kiran was at his limit. She was anxious, too, as the longer they waited, the worse it could get for them. After the meal, the three returned to their rooms. Jenny, like a clingy child, snuggled up to Kiran. Knowing their union could strengthen their powers, Kiran willingly spent time with her. Meanwhile, in the Jade Dragon Mountain headquarters, an elder stood in the main hall. The hall was divided into left and right sections, filled with people who looked grave and silent. The tense atmosphere was palpable, not out of fear of Kiran, but due to internal disagreements. "Elder Goss, you should contact sect leader Yarrow. We can't handle this matter carelessly," said a tall, slightly overweight man. The people on his side of the hall shared the same sentiment, all looking to Elder Goss for a decision. Elder Goss's face was grim as he glanced at the people on the right. A thin, short man on the right sneered and began to speak. Chapter 1022. "Chris Barrett, are you afraid of Kiran York?" The thin man, Rupert Jameson, said mockingly to the tall man on the left. "Rupert Jameson, there's no need for your sarcasm. You know very well whether I'm afraid of Kiran," Chris Barrett replied, looking earnestly at Elder Cyril Goss. "Kiran may have killed many of our Imperial Dragon members, but he also retrieved Elder Blake Frost's body. Moreover, he hasn't harmed anyone recently. Let's not forget that during the battle in Sunland, Kiran earned our Dragon Soul Sword and received recognition from sect leader Axel Yanes. So what if he received recognition from sect leader Axel Yanes? Kiran's enmity with us runs deep and he's killed so many of our people. Shouldn't we kill him?" Rupert Jameson's face remained stern and determined. "If you want to kill Kiran, then tell me, how do you plan to do it?" Chris sneered at Rupert. "There are so many of us. Are you saying we can't come up with a way to kill Kiran?" Rupert retorted. Chris knew Rupert was trying to push the responsibility of killing Kiran onto him, so he involved everyone else. The people in the room remained silent, listening to the argument without participating. Imperial Dragon had split into two factions, one seeking reconciliation with Kiran, and the other wanting to kill him. With Daniel Yarrow in seclusion, Chief Steward Cyril Goss, who managed Imperial Dragon headquarters, found himself in a dilemma. Cyril had mixed feelings about Kiran, recognizing his strengths but also resenting the deaths he caused. This conflict made it hard for Cyril to make a decision. "Elder Goss, if we hesitate any longer, we might miss a good opportunity for reconciliation," Chris Barrett urged Cyril, seeing his indecision. "Chris Barrett, I never thought you'd be such a coward. You're disgracing Imperial Dragon." Rupert scolded loudly. Finally angered by Rupert's provocation, Chris retorted, "You sent Rex Kane to test Kiran's strength, and he was kicked away by the woman beside Kiran. Don't you feel embarrassed?" Chris's blunt question left Rupert speechless, his face contorted with anger, but he held back his retort. The atmosphere in the hall grew tenser, filled with mutual resentment and frustration. Those against fighting Kiran hoped the others would yield, while those wanting to fight sought support for their cause. Sensing the escalating tension, Cyril Goss spoke coldly. "Enough. We will decide by noon tomorrow. If sect leader Yarrow hasn't emerged from seclusion, we'll make the final decision then." Cyril's authority silenced the room. "Until noon tomorrow, no one is to provoke Kiran. If anyone disobeys, they will be severely punished according to the sect's rules," he warned, his fierce gaze sweeping over everyone. Everyone lowered their heads in response, even Rupert. Despite their high-ranking positions, they didn't dare challenge Cyril Goss's authority. As the hall cleared, Chris led the way out. Left alone, Cyril's face reflected his inner turmoil. He returned to his quarters, finding Taoist Master Caleb inside. Upon seeing Cyril, Caleb knelt, filled with remorse. "I'm sorry, Chief Steward, I failed my mission." Cyril sat down, staring at the kneeling Caleb. "Kiran ruined my plans. We couldn't secure the Dragon Vein at 5 Rams Mountain, and although Horace Moore and I attempted to obtain the Dragon Vein at Phoenix Cry Mountain, an unexpected event thwarted us," Caleb explained. Cyril's expression was stern, his hands clenched into fists. Caleb, unable to read Cyril's thoughts, felt increasingly anxious. "Does Kiran now possess several dragon veins?" Cyril finally asked. Caleb nodded eagerly. "Yes, Chief Steward. He has several dragon veins, and Jenny Leo holds the Dragon Vein of Dragon's Mount within her, a living dragon vein." Cyril's face changed again, prompting a sense of unease in Caleb. Cyril sighed, standing up and walking towards Caleb. Just as Caleb was about to speak, he saw Cyril Goss's hand coming towards him. Chapter 1023. Caleb's eyes widened in shock, his face filled with astonishment. Instinctively, he wanted to get up and dodge, but it was already too late. Cyril Goss's palm landed on his head without a loud sound, seemingly gentle. However, Caleb felt his body shatter internally like a glass breaking into countless pieces. His body then went limp, and he collapsed to the ground without spilling a drop of blood, already dead. Caleb couldn't believe that Kiran York hadn't killed him, nor had he killed Kiran, but instead he was killed by his own master. He had committed countless heinous deeds at 5 Rams Mountain for his master, and today he finally met his retribution. His death was unjust and powerless. With unresolved resentment, Caleb died. Cyril raised his hand, scattering a powder over Caleb's body which emitted a sizzling sound and quickly vanished. Cyril opened the doors and windows to disperse the smell, then walked out into the courtyard, his eyes gazing into the distance as he pondered how to deal with Kiran York. A soldier who doesn't want to be a general is not a good soldier. Someone who doesn't aspire to be the sect leader of the Imperial Dragon isn't normal. Though Cyril was just one step away from being the sect leader, he knew that this single step was a world apart. If Axel Yanes hadn't died in Sunland, Daniel Yarrow wouldn't have become the sect leader. Cyril also aspired to the position, but achieving it through strength alone seemed impossible. Thus, he sought the power of the dragon veins to become stronger. Caleb was his agent at 5 Rams Mountain, aiming to obtain its dragon vein, but the plan failed. Now, Caleb had to die to keep this secret buried forever. After standing in the courtyard for a long time, Cyril returned to his room, not noticing someone lying quietly on the ground in the distance, afraid of being discovered. It was Horace Moore who had followed Caleb there. Horace had always wanted to know who Caleb was working for, so he secretly followed him after arriving at Jade Dragon Mountain. Since Horace was more skilled in martial arts and had absorbed the power of the dragon veins, following Caleb was easy. Without realizing it, he had tracked him to Cyril's residence. Although he didn't witness the killing, the strange smell in the air confirmed Caleb's death. Knowing the low status of sect leaders at Imperial Dragon headquarters, Horace lay still, not wanting to alert Cyril. After Cyril's lights went out, Horace slowly got up and disappeared into the darkness. His back was soaked with sweat from the tension and fear. If Cyril had discovered him, he would have been killed to silence him. The more you know, the faster you die, Horace thought. Despite his confidence from absorbing the Dragon Vein's power, he didn't want to face Cyril or alert others in Imperial Dragon. After hesitating for a while, Horace didn't seek his supporters but went to the Jade Dragon Hotel. He quietly reached room 603. After a moment's hesitation, he slid a note under the door and quickly left. Inside, Lilian was cultivating using the Joyful Odyssey to absorb Dragon Vein energy from Kiran and Jenny Leo. She wanted to enhance her abilities to help Kiran. Hearing something, she opened her eyes and instantly reached the door. Seeing a note, she picked it up and read, "Cyril Goss has ambitions." The note, written in shaky handwriting with the left hand, didn't reveal the author. Lilian's face changed as she read the message, realizing the ambitious nature of Cyril Goss, a man of great power within Imperial Dragon. Worry filled her as she thought about Daniel Yarrow, knowing that the situation would worsen if Cyril also aimed to kill Kiran. She stored the note, feeling uneasy but didn't disturb Kiran and Jenny. The next morning, Lilian ate breakfast alone, noticing Kiran and Jenny hadn't appeared. She assumed they were exhausted from the previous night and didn't wake them. She finally saw Kiran and Jenny during lunch, noticing their enhanced aura. Kiran's strength had grown, and Jenny's skin glowed with beauty and radiance, making Lilian feel a tinge of envy. "Lilian, have they sent any news?" Kiran asked. "Let's eat first. The agreed time hasn't come yet." "Why so anxious?" Lilian replied, hiding her concern about Cyril's ambitions. Kiran sensed something in Lilian's tone but didn't press further, having promised to wait until evening. "Why are you in such a hurry? If they don't give us an answer, we'll go to Jade Dragon Mountain and kill them all," Jenny said nonchalantly. Lilian felt helpless, thinking Jenny was fueling Kiran's fire. She hoped Cyril wouldn't act rashly, fearing the internal collapse of Imperial Dragon. In the Jade Dragon Mountain Hall, Cyril had gathered Chris Barrett and Rupert Jameson's factions for a meeting. The atmosphere was tense, filled with escalating conflict. Chapter 1024 Sect Leader hasn't come out of seclusion. "Let's take a vote on how to handle Kiran York coming to Jade Dragon Mountain," Elder Cyril Goss said to the gathered crowd. Rupert Jameson was the first to speak up, addressing Elder Goss. "Chief Steward, I believe we must kill Kiran. Otherwise, where is our Imperial Dragon's dignity?" The already tense atmosphere grew even more charged with Rupert's words. On the other side, Chris Barrett glared at Rupert with anger, saying, "It seems to me that, with you in the picture, Imperial Dragon is losing its sense of honor and responsibility." Rupert sneered at Chris and said, "As protectors of Imperial Dragon, submitting to Kiran is a disgrace. Shouldn't we avenge those from Wolfgate, Panthergate, and Liongate who died by Kiran's hand?" Rupert's three questions made the atmosphere even more intense. Many began to reflect on the fact that some among them had killed Kiran's family members. Chris countered, "If you're so keen on killing Kiran, are you going to do it yourself? Or do you plan on ambushing him like the Sunland Ninjas?" Chris's pointed questions caused faces to change, knowing that challenging Kiran one-on-one was a daunting task. "Chris, you're missing the point. Do we have to fight Kiran one-on-one just because he's strong?" Rupert responded angrily. "If we gang up on him, how are we any different from the Sunland Ninjas?" Chris retorted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Are you equating us with Sunland Ninjas?" Rupert twisted Chris's words deliberately. Chris's face darkened as he was about to argue back, but Elder Goss raised his hand, silencing the room. Chris swallowed his words and looked at Elder Goss. Rupert remained defiant but silent. "We will wait until 5 p.m. If Sect Leader Yarrow hasn't come out by then, we will vote on how to deal with Kiran," Elder Goss declared. "I don't think we need to wait a second longer. Let's act now," Rupert said, maintaining his combative stance. Chris smirked at Rupert, who glared back, the tension between them palpable. "Dismissed," Elder Goss ordered sternly. The factions led by Chris and Rupert left, exchanging angry glares. Elder Goss's authority kept them in line. Standing alone in the hall, Elder Goss pondered how to handle Kiran. He remembered Taoist Master Caleb's words about Kiran obtaining power from several dragon veins, including the live dragon vein within Jenny Leo. Elder Goss' desire for the dragon vein's power was strong, but he knew it would be difficult without unified support. Chris's faction sought reconciliation, valuing Kiran for retrieving the dragon soul sword and Elder Blake Frost's body. Back in his room, Rupert found Horace Moore waiting. Rupert's eyebrows twitched as he asked, "Your withered wood technique has advanced so much?" "Thanks to the withered wood technique from Chief Protector Jameson," Horace replied, bowing slightly. Rupert nodded, acknowledging Horace's gratitude. "What brings you here?" "I followed Kiran to Jade Dragon Mountain. I tried to obtain the dragon veins at 5 Rams Mountain and Phoenix Cry Mountain but failed," Horace said with regret. "That's a pity. If you had gotten the dragon veins' power, you could have become stronger and shared some with me. Rupert's tone was filled with regret and greed. That's why I followed Kiran here, hoping to seize an opportunity to gain the dragon veins power from him, Horace continued. Have you discovered anything? Rupert asked eagerly. 2 important things, Horace said, his tone tinged with excitement. What are they? Rupert asked impatiently. First, the dragon vein at Dragon's Mount is alive and coexists within Jenny Leo's body. Is that so? Rupert's eyes widened with delight. So, the dragon vein's power is within Jenny Leo? Horace nodded vigorously. Yes, it's in Jenny Leo. Interesting, Rupert said with a brightening gaze. What's the second discovery? Elder Goss also covets the dragon vein's power, Horace revealed, recalling Taoist Master Caleb's death and the tension it brought. You say Elder Goss wants the dragon vein's power? Rupert was even more surprised. I encountered Taoist Master Caleb at 5 Rams Mountain. He accompanied me to Jade Dragon Mountain. Last night, Caleb visited Elder Goss and never came out. Horace trailed off, his meaning clear. Rupert understood immediately, a cold smile forming on his lips. I didn't expect Elder Goss to be so greedy. One step forward is the sky. Elder Goss is ambitious, Horace warned. A cunning smile appeared on Rupert's face. If he wants to be the leader, let him. I can help him achieve that. Chapter 1025. Elder Barrett, what do you mean by that? Horace Moore asked Rupert Jameson. Rupert made no attempt to hide his intentions. I strongly advocate for killing Kiran York. However, Chris Barrett and his supporters oppose this, and Elder Cyril Goss remains indecisive. Hearing Rupert's stance, Horace's eyes lit up. If we can join forces to kill Kiran, you could absorb the dragon vein's power and perhaps even surpass. Rupert and Horace shared a knowing smile. Unlike Elder Goss, I don't have such grand ambitions. I'd be content just succeeding him, Rupert said humbly, though Horace knew Rupert was playing the long game, keeping a low profile while steadily increasing his power. Horace, ever the diplomat, gave Rupert a thumbs up. Elder Jameson, your strategic foresight is remarkable. I should learn from Elder Jameson. Don't worry, if the time comes I will definitely promote you, Rupert said with a confident smile. I need reliable people like you, and you're rare. Rest assured. Rupert continued. I would never do what Elder Goss did to Taoist Master Caleb. Although Horace didn't trust Rupert completely, he nodded earnestly. I believe in you, Elder Jameson. Do you have any suggestions? Rupert asked. Knowing Rupert was testing him, Horace pretended to think deeply before answering. I suggest you confront Elder Goss directly. This will force him to take a firm stance against Kiran. Won't that provoke Elder Goss? Rupert asked, frowning slightly. Of course it will, but he's more afraid of his plans being exposed. If that happens, everyone will turn against him, and even Daniel Yarrow might punish him, Horace explained. Rupert smiled brightly at Horace's analysis. You're right. Elder Goss probably covets Kiran's dragon vein power. I suspect Caleb didn't tell him about the living dragon vein in Jenny Leo. If you kill Kiran together, I can take Jenny away and you'll have access to the dragon vein's power anytime, Horace suggested. Rupert coldly smiled, knowing Horace wanted the dragon vein power for himself. However, he wasn't concerned, confident in his ability to control Horace. Sounds good. I'll also try to absorb some of Kiran's dragon vein power. Horace nodded approvingly. I believe you can achieve this, Elder Jameson. Rupert laughed heartily, filled with confidence. I'll go find Elder Goss now. You rest here. I'm always at your service, Horace replied, expressing his loyalty. Rupert nodded and left. As he watched Rupert's departing figure, Horace's eyes gleamed with cunning. He knew Rupert was using him, but he wasn't a fool either. On the other hand, Rupert harbored greed and wariness towards Horace, planning to use and dispose of him later if needed. Rupert went straight to the hall where Elder Cyril Goss stood, still pondering Kiran's situation. Only Taoist Master Caleb knew Elder Goss's desire for dragon vein power. Elder Goss had always been cautious given the loyalty many still felt towards the dead Axel Yanes. Despite Daniel Yarrow becoming the sect leader, some still saw Axel as the true leader. This sentiment had led to internal strife when the York family was annihilated. Daniel Yarrow had enforced his will, intending to erase Axel's influence by killing Tsar Yanes. Even so, after the York family massacre and Axel's death, Lilian Yanes remained the leader of Foxgate. Though Daniel Yarrow wanted Lilian dead, he didn't dare act too overtly, leaving the situation unresolved. Elder Goss, aware of his limitations in martial arts and influence, felt the weight of his ambitions. He needed the dragon vein's power to secure his position as sect leader. His only confidant, Taoist Master Caleb, was now dead, leaving Elder Goss to ponder the risky move against Kiran. Just then, Rupert entered. Elder Jameson, what brings you here? Elder Goss asked, displeased by the interruption. Rupert, brimming with confidence from Horace's information, looked at Elder Goss and said, "Cooperating with you to kill Kiran York." Chapter 1026. Elder Cyril Goss was momentarily taken aback, then sneered at Rupert Jameson. "What are you talking about, Elder Jameson? I don't understand." "Chief Steward, we've known each other for decades. There's no need to hide things from each other anymore," Rupert said confidently, looking directly at Elder Goss. Elder Goss's expression changed several times before he coldly replied, "I don't know what you're talking about." "Daniel Yarrow succeeded the position of sect leader from the Chief Steward," Rupert hinted. Rupert's words were subtle, but they clearly conveyed that he knew of Elder Goss' ambitions. Elder Goss' face changed dramatically, realizing that Rupert had a grasp on his true intentions. Rupert noticed Elder Goss's silence and pressed on, "Chief Steward, you've held this position for many years. Don't you know that many are eyeing your spot, just as you eye the sect leader's position?" Rupert's statement struck a nerve with Elder Goss, making him feel a sense of urgency and vulnerability. However, years of experience allowed him to remain calm. "What do you want to say?" he asked, masking his anxiety with a smile. Rupert decided to lay it all out. "The destruction and attempts to seize the dragon veins at 5 Rams Mountain by Taoist Master Caleb have caused public outrage." Elder Goss's expression shifted as he shot a wary glance at Rupert. Rupert maintained a calm demeanor, showing no fear. "If people knew that someone orchestrated Taoist Master Caleb's actions, how do you think they would react?" Rupert's words, though veiled, were a clear threat. Elder Goss sensed the pressure mounting. Having lived long enough, both men were like old foxes. Rupert's boldness in approaching him suggested that he had substantial information. Elder Goss didn't understand how Rupert had discovered his connection with Caleb, but he remained cautious. "You're trying to force my hand into supporting your plan to kill Kiran, aren't you?" he asked. Rupert laughed, recognizing Elder Goss's indirect admission. "I want to help you kill Kiran. You know Kiran is very powerful. Killing him won't be easy," Elder Goss said, feigning concern. "We can vote on it, as you suggested. Currently, the votes to kill Kiran are evenly split. Your decision will be the deciding factor," Rupert replied, smiling. "Many still remember Axel Yanes fondly and even have feelings for Zara Yanes. I believe that while sect leader Yarrow is in seclusion, he doesn't want to live under someone else's shadow." Elder Goss couldn't help but smile at Rupert's subtle insinuation. "Do you think we can guarantee success?" he asked. Rupert straightened up, brimming with confidence. "The people of Imperial Dragon at Jade Dragon Mountain are elite fighters, unlike the useless Sunland ninjas." Elder Goss smiled, but internally scoffed at the comparison, remembering the heavy losses inflicted by the so-called uselesses ninjas. "I'm worried that people might back out at the last moment. If that happens, things will get complicated." Rupert nodded in agreement. "Indeed, Kiran is very strong. None of us could take him one-on-one. Deciding who goes first is difficult, and no one wants to be the first to die. That's my concern. Who would willingly go first to certain death?" Elder Goss questioned. Rupert's eyes twinkled with a sly idea. "We could be ruthless." "What do you mean?" Elder Goss inquired. "Let's blow up the Jade Dragon Hotel and eliminate Kiran along with it," Rupert suggested, waiting for Elder Goss's approval. Elder Goss hesitated as he desired the dragon vein's power within Kiran. Killing him this way would destroy what he coveted. Rupert saw this hesitation as confirmation of Elder Goss's greed. Feigning a change of heart, Rupert said, "If you think that's too obvious, we could poison their food." Elder Goss's eyes brightened momentarily, but he quickly dismissed the idea. "Kiran is a skilled doctor. Ordinary poison wouldn't work and might alert him." Rupert nodded. "Kiran's medical skills are indeed formidable. Ordinary poison won't affect him, and he would likely detect it. But we can change our approach." "How?" Elder Goss's face showed eager anticipation. "We can poison Lilian Yanes. Kiran will focus on curing her, depleting his energy. That will give us an opportunity to kill him," Rupert suggested slyly. Elder Goss's face lit up with joy at Rupert's devious plan. "Can you arrange someone to administer the poison?" he asked Rupert. Chapter 1027. Poison Lilian Yanes? Elder Cyril Goss looked seriously at Rupert Jameson. A sinister smile spread across Rupert's thin face. "Lilian represents Axel Yanes and Zara Yanes. If she dies from poisoning, we eliminate a major spiritual enemy." Elder Goss's expression shifted repeatedly as he looked at Rupert. "Didn't you say the goal was to drain Kiran York's energy?" Rupert's eyes gleamed with malice. "Draining Kiran's energy is one option. It all depends on our strategy." Elder Goss understood that Rupert wanted either to poison Lilian directly or to use her to weaken Kiran. "Do you have a good method for poisoning her?" he asked. Rupert shook his head. "I'm not skilled in poison, but I think Ghost Dr. Richard Little could handle it." "Richard Little is against harming Kiran. How could he agree to poison Lilian?" Elder Goss questioned. We need to offer Richard enough benefits. If the reward is substantial, he'll help us, Rupert replied confidently. If you can arrange this, I'll support your plan in tonight's vote, Elder Goss said firmly. Rupert was pleased with Elder Goss's decision. I'll handle Richard Little personally, he assured. Elder Goss didn't respond, indicating he expected Rupert to take action. Rupert left and returned to his residence where Horace Moore was waiting. Is it settled? Horace asked eagerly. It's settled. Now we just need Richard Little to poison Lilian, Rupert said coldly. Horace frowned. Richard Little is stubborn. How can you convince him? Rupert's eyes flashed with cunning. Richard Little has a niece named Barbara, one of Lilian's subordinates. Lilian values her people highly. Barbara is likely very important to her, Horace speculated. Exactly. If you can implicate Barbara in a scandal and make it look like Kiran is to blame, Richard will be furious, Rupert explained. Horace's heart raced with excitement. I'll handle it. Once it's done, I'll inform you immediately. Good. Do it well, Rupert urged. Horace quickly left for the Jade Dragon Hotel, where he easily found Barbara's room. Peering through the window, he saw her watching TV, looking relaxed after a tiring day of serving Lilian. Horace's eyes gleamed with lust as he watched the beautiful and young Barbara. He gently opened the door and burst in. Barbara leaped up to defend herself but was swiftly overpowered and immobilized by Horace, who then violated her. As the person in charge of Foxgate, Barbara had been here a long time, so she knew Horace. Her beautiful eyes widened as she looked at Horace angrily. She wanted to scream, but her acupoints had already been tapped and she could not speak. Horace pushed her onto the bed without hesitation and turned into a ferocious beast. Tears of humiliation streamed down Barbara's face as she lay helpless. After finishing, Horace killed her, wrapped her body, and carried it to Kiran's room, where he placed her beside the sleeping Kiran and Jenny Leo. Kiran and Jenny had been immersed in crazy cultivation earlier, so the two were exhausted and sound asleep. As a result, they did not hear Horace enter. Horace returned to Rupert, who noticed his revitalized demeanor. Is it done? Rupert asked. Horace nodded and made a throat-slitting gesture, indicating Barbara's death. Good. Now hide and be ready to capture Jenny Leo when the time comes, Rupert instructed. Don't worry, Elder Jameson. I'll complete my task, Horace said, eyes shining with excitement. Kiran woke up to find Barbara's body beside him. Shocked, he jumped out of bed. Chapter 1028, What's going on? Hearing the commotion, Jenny Leo opened her eyes and saw Barbara lying between her and Kiran York. She was stunned. Barbara is dead, Kiran said to Jenny, his expression grave. Jenny quickly began to dress and said to Kiran, Let's find Sister Lilian first. This is very strange. Kiran remained calm, not moving, his gaze turning cold and narrowing. He understood that with him and Jenny preoccupied with training, there was no way Barbara could have just appeared between them. This was clearly someone framing them. Sensing Kiran's shift in demeanor and knowing he was angry, Jenny said, Regardless, Barbara was one of Sister Lilian's people. You need to explain this to her. Suppressing his anger, Kiran nodded and began dressing. He then went to knock on Lilian Yanez's door. Lilian opened the door to see Kiran's cold expression and couldn't help but ask worriedly, What happened? Barbara inexplicably died in bed with me and Jenny, Kiran replied icily, filled with anger. Lilian's face turned pale, replaced quickly by a look of fear and then anger. She stared at Kiran and asked, Who did this? Did you have no sense of it? Embarrassed, Kiran replied. Jenny and I were so exhausted that we fell asleep and didn't notice. Lilian's expression grew more serious and she began pacing back and forth, clearly anxious and worried. What's wrong? Is this very serious? Kiran asked, looking at Lilian. Lilian, contemplating the possibility of Elder Cyril Goss's scheme, responded, Barbara is the niece of Ghost Dr. Richard Little. What's so special about Richard Little? Is he highly skilled or powerful? Kiran asked, not particularly concerned. In his eyes, he hadn't harmed Barbara, so her death was unrelated to him. What truly angered him was someone daring to target him so directly. Ghost Dr. Richard Little is not only highly skilled in medicine, but also represents those in Imperial Dragon who support Axel Yanez and Zara Yanez, Lilian said, worry filling her eyes. Kiran understood that Richard Little's anger could potentially mobilize the righteous forces within the Imperial Dragon against him. He chuckled and said, If these people are so foolish, then no matter how just they think they are, they're only continuing their stupidity. Inform Richard quickly. He might be able to find out the cause, Lilian said, knowing she couldn't reason with Kiran on this matter, so she sent someone to relay the news to Richard Little. Kiran remained silent, waiting to see how the situation would unfold, knowing his deadline was approaching. News of Barbara's death spread quickly through the Jade Dragon Hotel. Within half an hour, an elderly man with white hair and an air of elegance arrived, though his face was marked with anxiety and anger, exuding a strong, murderous intent. Rex Kane, the deputy security chief of the hotel, greeted him respectfully. "Greetings, Elder Little." Richard Little ignored the greeting, hurrying upstairs to room 601. Delighted by Little's evident anger, Rex followed, hoping Little would lash out at and kill Kiran. Richard entered the room and first sniffed the air. Without a word, he quickly approached the bed to examine Barbara's body. Her eyes were closed, face tear-stained, fists clenched as if in a desperate struggle, her face as pale as paper. Seeing her exposed body marked with signs of male violence, Richard's heart filled with burning rage. Kiran, Lilian, and Jenny stood by, watching his reaction. Richard, seemingly ignoring them, examined Barbara's body for about 10 minutes before looking up at Kiran with anger. "You beast! How could you commit such a vile act?" Also enraged by the accusation, Kiran coldly replied, "With Lilian and Jenny by my side, both far more beautiful than Barbara, why would I be interested in a trash like her?" Annoyed at being wrongly accused, Kiran had harshly labeled Barbara as trash. Lilian, anxious at his words, tried to intervene, but Richard, now even more incensed, snapped at Kiran. "You'll regret this. I'll see to it that the chief steward deals with you." "Senior Little, please calm down. This matter is suspicious and unrelated to Kiran," Lilian urged. Richard sneered. "To think you'd stoop so low as to defend such a scoundrel? You'll both regret this when Imperial Dragon comes for you." Kiran was also infuriated by Richard Little's behavior. He sneered at Richard and said, "To think you call yourself the ghost doctor. Your medical skills are nothing." This provoked Richard further, though he remained outwardly calm. "You just wait. The entire Imperial Dragon will be against you," he warned, before leaving swiftly for the Imperial Dragon headquarters. Lilian's face was filled with worry, while Kiran's fighting spirit surged. Chapter 1029. At the headquarters of Imperial Dragon, the atmosphere was extremely tense. Elder Cyril Goss stood there, his face as dark as water, his eyes cold. However, he felt a sense of satisfaction because Rupert Jameson's plan had been very successful, already inciting Richard Little's anger. As for the others, they were already aware of what had happened, and they were equally furious, thinking Kiran was acting like a beast. "Chief Steward, you must avenge my niece." Richard Little looked at Elder Goss, crying out. Although Richard Little wasn't the strongest in martial arts within Imperial Dragon, his expertise in medicine made him highly respected. His position in Imperial Dragon was quite exalted, and everyone showed him great respect. Elder Goss was equally furious, though his anger was directed at Rupert Jameson. Rupert had promised benefits to Richard Little, but instead he had stirred up hatred. Before Elder Goss could speak, Rupert Jameson couldn't wait to curse angrily. "Kiran is simply an animal doing such beastly things." This remark ignited the flames of anger in the hall, and everyone's eyes turned to Elder Goss. Rupert was inwardly delighted. He hadn't expected that moving this piece would have such a great effect. He deliberately looked at Chris Barrett and said, "Elder Barrett, haven't you always wanted to protect Kiran? Didn't you think we should give him an explanation? Now, shouldn't Kiran give us an explanation?" Chris now looked heavy-hearted, filled with disbelief. Rupert's questioning took him by surprise. He had never met Kiran, but he knew Kiran was with Lilian Yanez, who was stunningly beautiful, like a celestial being. How could Kiran have attacked Barbara? Yet Barbara's strange death in Kiran's bed was indeed hard to explain. Even if someone wanted to set them up, how could it be done? Seeing Chris not responding immediately, Rupert continued with a sneer. "Elder Barrett, this is the person you think has done favors for our Imperial Dragon? The one we should respect. Kiran." Rupert's words were so affirming that it was like pouring oil on a fire, filling everyone's hearts with shock and anger. "Kiran is simply a beast," Richard Little suddenly cried out beside them. "What do you all think should be done?" Elder Goss asked coldly, looking at everyone. He had already decided to side with Rupert Jameson and act out the plan to kill Kiran. Everyone's faces were grave, feeling Elder Goss had made up his mind. Kiran was to be killed. "I support killing Kiran." Rupert Jameson was the first to stand up. "I support it too." Those who supported killing Kiran immediately followed suit. Soon, most of the people in the hall stood up to support killing Kiran. Even those who initially didn't want to kill Kiran now felt murderous because they believed Kiran was responsible for Barbara's death, which greatly angered everyone. "Elder Barrett, why are you still not expressing your stance? Do you still think we shouldn't kill Kiran?" Rupert looked at Chris, questioning. Chris took a deep breath, looked at Elder Goss and said, "Elder Goss, I still don't believe Kiran would do such a thing. I think we should investigate this matter thoroughly." "Ha!" Rupert let out a disdainful laugh, looked at Chris and said, "The facts are right before us and you still don't believe it? You're truly foolish and ignorant." "My poor niece!" Richard Little cried out in great sorrow. Richard's cry made the already oppressive and angry hall even more tense. "Kill Kiran!" Rupert shouted. "Kill Kiran!" The shouts instantly echoed throughout the hall, and everyone seemed filled with intense killing intent. "Chief Steward, I suggest Elder Barrett be responsible for killing Kiran," Rupert suggested to Elder Goss, seeing that Chris still didn't speak up. Chris's face showed a mix of anger and frustration as he coldly stared at Rupert. Rupert's eyes were filled with cold excitement and mockery, as if to say he was deliberately playing Chris Barrett. Elder Goss knew they wanted Chris to be the sacrificial lamb, drawing all the hatred. His face showed a deliberately solemn look as he said to Richard, "Elder Little, please restrain your grief. We are also deeply grieved and heartbroken by what happened." Richard didn't speak, only cried loudly, beating his chest in despair. Elder Goss looked at the others and said, "None of us are without gratitude towards Richard Little. Without his miraculous medical skills, some of us might not even be alive today." Elder Goss's words implicitly told everyone they should avenge Richard's niece, Barbara. "Chris Barrett, have you forgotten Richard's kindness? Without him, your arm would have been useless." Rupert took the opportunity to pressure Chris. Chris was rendered speechless by Rupert's words. He could only look at Richard Little and say, "Elder Little, rest assured, I will help you with this matter." Rupert was delighted to hear Chris agree to help, knowing he had made him the first to face the wrath. "Chief Steward, since Elder Barrett is willing to take the lead, we should give him this opportunity." Those who were allied with Chris Barrett also felt sympathy for him, knowing he was being forced into a deadly situation due to his earlier opposition, which had angered Rupert. But no one stood up to plead for him, as they didn't want to face death either. Elder Goss pretended to show a sad and sympathetic expression as he said to Chris, "Elder Barrett, it seems we must trouble you with this matter." Chris ignored Elder Goss, looked at Richard, and said, "Elder Little, I will go, I owe you this, and I will repay it." Chris looked around at everyone, his voice firm. "I will go to kill Kiran now, but I can tell you that Kiran did not do this, and I don't think I can kill him." "Elder Barrett, do you still not believe Kiran did such a beastly thing?" Rupert pretended to be very angry as he questioned. Chris acted as if he hadn't heard and turned to leave. The others didn't move, waiting for Elder Goss's command. "We will go together," Elder Goss said in a deep voice, following Chris out. Richard Little didn't move, but his eyes were filled with cold anger. He knew Kiran wasn't the culprit. Chapter 1030. At Jade Dragon Hotel. Chris Barrett arrived outside the Jade Dragon Hotel and stood at the entrance, shouting in a deep voice, "Kiran York, come out here!" His voice was filled with dominance, authority, and anger. Kiran had been waiting inside for someone from Imperial Dragon to show up. Hearing Chris's shout, he immediately stepped out of his room. Jenny Leo quickly followed, her beautiful face filled with anger, clearly ready to confront whoever came. Lilian Jans also rushed out of her room. Seeing Jenny's agitation, she hurriedly stepped forward to hold her back, saying, "Jenny, calm down. Let me handle this first." Jenny's lovely face was full of anger as she looked at Lilian. "Imperial Dragon people are framing us and causing trouble. They're just asking for it." Lilian felt the powerful aura emanating from Jenny, making her uneasy. "You two, stop arguing and stay by my side. Watch out for each other. I'll handle the rest," Kiran said calmly to the two women, exuding a strong battle intent. At this moment, Kiran York couldn't wait to attack. Lilian, her stunning face showing a hint of frustration, glared at Kiran and said, "Don't mess around. Wait for my signal." Lilian knew Kiran was ready to escalate the situation, making her even more anxious. She tried to push him and Jenny back into the room, but Kiran had already slipped past her and quickly headed downstairs. Lilian, exasperated, could only follow quickly. Jenny, eager for a fight, trailed behind, wanting to see if she could kick someone away like before. Imperial Dragon members were already gathered around Chris Barrett outside the hotel, preparing to make a show of force. When Kiran, Lilian, and Jenny reached the lobby, they saw over 100 people gathered, with Chris Barrett standing at the front. His martial arts skills were considered high among his peers, but to Kiran, Lilian, and Jenny, he was insignificant. Lilian was surprised to see Chris Barrett leading the charge, as he was known to be one of the most loyal followers of Axel Jans in Imperial Dragon. She quickly approached him and asked politely, "Chris, why are you here?" Chris's face was serious as he looked at Lilian and said, "I'm here to avenge Barbara." His gaze then turned to Kiran, filled with a desire to kill him on the spot. "Chris, Barbara died a terrible death," Rex Kane, standing beside Chris, said angrily. Rex's words fueled the anger of the Imperial Dragon members, who looked ready to attack Kiran. Lilian became more anxious and looked at Chris, saying, "This wasn't Kiran's doing. It was me who killed Barbara. If you want revenge, come at me." Kiran interrupted Lilian, stepping forward and defiantly challenging Chris and his group. Rex and the others didn't dare move, remembering how Jenny had easily kicked him away before. Facing Kiran was even more daunting. Chris was surprised and somewhat appreciative of Kiran's boldness, but he quickly suppressed these feelings, glaring at Kiran. "Why did you kill Barbara so cruelly?" "You don't deserve to know," Kiran replied disdainfully, taking another step forward. "If you want revenge, stop wasting time and come at me." "Chris, Kiran didn't kill Barbara," Lilian said sincerely, looking at Chris. "It doesn't matter whether he did or not." "Everyone knows Kiran killed Barbara and they will be here soon," Chris replied. Lilian's face grew more serious. She realized Chris was here more to warn them than to fight. Kiran also sensed Chris's intent and was slightly taken aback by his support. At that moment, Elder Goss arrived with more people. Seeing the confrontation, Rupert Jameson was pleased and quickly stepped forward, saying, "Chris Barrett, now is your chance to repay Richard Little." Elder Goss remained silent but watched the scene with a grim expression, ready to turn it into a bloody battle at any moment. Chris Barrett turned to Kiran and said, "I will strike you 3 times. If you can withstand my attacks, it proves you harmed Barbara. If not, it proves you did not." "What do you mean, Chris?" Rupert asked angrily. "Rupert, do you want to try?" Chris replied, challenging Rupert. Rupert knew facing Kiran would be suicidal and stayed silent. Hence, he deliberately looked at Chris and said, "Now is your chance to perform, not my time to make a move." "This is my fight," Chris said, dismissing Rupert and not giving him face. Chris looked at Lilian and said, "I've made my terms clear. Prepare yourselves." Lilian understood Chris's intent to let Kiran fake a defeat and escape, avoiding further conflict. On the other hand, if Kiran York really killed Chris Barrett in agitation, it would definitely cause public anger. At that time, this scene might go out of control. Lilian couldn't help but feel a little touched and complicated. She didn't expect Chris to still believe in Kiran and want to protect him. It could be said that Chris Barrett respected and trusted Axel Yanes from the bottom of his heart. Kiran also realized Chris's plan and smiled, stepping forward, saying, "I killed Barbara." As Kiran moved towards Chris, his hand was already reaching out.